All right, Assalamu alaikum everyone. You guys asked me to make a recording for your general queries pertaining to grammar, and that's what we're doing today. Um, so I only got one student's query, right? And the rest were just stuff that I think you guys are struggling with because you keep making those mistakes in the work that I've checked, right? So far. So let's start, right? So the first thing that you guys asked me to cover is how to transition between ideas in a narrative without using the word but to begin with, right? So I've reiterated again and again that you do not start a sentence with the word but, right? You can use but as a conjunction when you are sort of joining two sentences, but you cannot start a sentence with but, right? Especially, okay, what to do when you can't use the word but to begin a sentence with, and especially when transitional devices do not fit either. So transitional devices usually do fit if you're looking at the right ones, right? So you could just look up synonyms for but, right? So an example would be however, right? Transitioning to another idea. Other synonyms, again, depending on what you were using but for in the first place. Let me show you guys a couple others that could have been used. Right. So you could use nevertheless, nonetheless, even so, however, I already told you guys about however, still, notwithstanding, despite that, in spite of that. The thing is that these are all, there's not just one thing that you can use but for. There's different situations or different ways that you use transitions, right? Different situations in which you use transitional devices or when you're shifting to another idea. So depending on what shift you are making, so for example, if the shift is from an opposing idea, right? So there was one idea that you put forth and then you're opposing it, you're going to pick a word that suggests opposition. So on the other hand, in contrast, right? However, again, others could be except for, apart from, other than, right? So you can just look up synonyms of but, and that should do. And then the synonym will also be used depending on the situation at hand, which is why whatever transitional device you are using, you need to know the meaning of it, right? So that you can pick the appropriate one according to the situation at hand. Okay. Um, Compound and complex sentences. So as far as compound sentences go, there are sentences that have an independent clause um, and an independent clause. So compound sentences, even if you've heard of like compound words, they're two words that make sense on their own and then they come together to make a new word. So for example, ice has a separate meaning, cream has a separate meaning, but they come together to create ice cream, right? A new word. So the same way, when we're talking about compound sentences, each sentence can stand alone on its own as well. And then we usually use a punctuation mark or a conjunction to bring those two sentences that can stand separately on their own. We bring them together to form a new sentence, right? So two sentences usually joined with a conjunction or even a punctuation mark like a semicolon. The two sentences, like I said, can also stand on their own. Example, I enjoy reading books, but my brother prefers watching movies. So I enjoy reading books, independent clause. My brother prefers watching movies, independent clause. Come together with a conjunction that is but. I enjoy reading books, but my brother prefers watching movies. And that is your compound sentence. I enjoy reading books and my brother prefers watching movies are both independent clauses. They're brought together by the part. Complex sentences. So independent clause and dependent clause, right? So dependent clause is a clause that needs the preceding clause for it to make sense, right? Then a dependent clause is depending on the independent clause for it to make sense, right? And the dependent clause can come first too. So it's not always the independent clause has to come first, then dependent clause has to come. Sometimes dependent clause comes first and then the independent clause comes, right? In both of those cases, the dependent clause still relies on the independent clause to make sense, right? So the independent clause can stand alone as a complete sentence, while the dependent clause relies on the independent clause to form a complete thought. A reiteration example. After the rain stopped, the sun came out, right? So in this, after the rain stopped, do you think that's complete sentence on its own. It's not, right? Um, After the rain stopped would not make complete sense without the independent clause, that is, the sun came out, right? So there's that. That is your complex sentence. Independent, dependent clause, and then your compound sentences, independent and independent clause. How to use hyphens and ellipses. So there are two functions of hyphens: to join compound words, i.e. a well-known actress, right? So well-known, right? We're using a hyphen to connect the two words. Prefixes and suffixes also use hyphens. So for example, ex-husband or pre-engineering, right? We're using a hyphen to show the prefix, right? How to use a semicolon. So there are two ways to use a semicolon. There's independent clause and independent clause, right? She loves to read. He prefers to watch movies, right? Right. Um, she loves to read. He prefers to watch movies. There's a semicolon in between to show that we put together an independent and independent clause, right? Um, Another way that you can use a semicolon is to join an independent clause with a dependent clause, the same way we were doing with complex sentences, right? So instead of a conjunction, etc., you're going to be using a semicolon. So she finished her work early, although she had many tasks left, right? So although she had many tasks left is your dependent clause, right? It wouldn't make sense without she finished her work early, which is a standalone sentence. It's an independent clause, can completely stand on its own, right? Another example of this would be the sun was setting over the horizon. Independent clause, right? It's a standalone sentence, makes complete sense on its own as well. And then casting a beautiful orange glow on the landscape, that part is your dependent clause, right? So there's a semicolon joining them, right? Casting a beautiful orange glow on the landscape would not stand on its own because we don't know what they're talking about, right? But because there's the independent clause before it, the whole sentence makes sense now, right? The sun was setting over the horizon, independent clause, casting a beautiful orange glow on the landscape, dependent clause. They can also be used, semicolons can also be used to separate items in a list, right? So semicolons can also be used to separate items in a list when those items contain commas themselves. This is a very important distinction, right? When those items contain commas themselves. As I proceed, you guys will better understand this, right? This helps to avoid confusion between the items in the list. For example, I have visited Paris, right? Which is in France, right? And then a semicolon, Rome, which is in Italy. Then a semicolon, and Barcelona, which is in Spain, right? Now, Paris, France, right? These are not two different cities, right? So Paris is a city in France, right? So the semicolons distinguish the particular city and country from the second city and country and the third city and country, right? I hope that makes sense, right? So there's a series, right? There are items in a list, but they're not just Paris, Rome, Barcelona, right? Um, if we had used a comma here instead, let's say, right? हम यहाँ पे commas डाल देते, it would seem like they're all cities or they're all countries, they're all same, right? But when we use the semicolon, it separates them, right? So this is Paris in France, Rome in Italy, and Barcelona, right? I hope that is clear. If you guys have any questions, just shoot me a text. The ingredients for the recipe include flour, sugar, and butter. So again, what they're doing is all the solid, more tangible kind of items. Well, they're all tangible. The more solid, dry items, right, are first. Flour, sugar, and butter, one group. Eggs, milk, and vanilla, the second group, which is the liquid material, right? Eggs, milk, vanilla, and chocolate chips, right, which are completely separate topping kind of ingredient. So all three groups have been separated by semicolons as opposed to commas, which are used within the group, right? When to use a capital letter? Capital letters are to be used at the beginning of sentences. So see here, we started with capital C. The first letter of the word you begin the sentence with must be capital. So the first word is this, and its first letter has to be capital. How to use ellipses, right? So ellipses are basically these things. These are dot, 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 right? So there are many ways that you can use an ellipse, but the main two ones that you guys should be aware of, because you will probably use it in your narratives, is first showing a pause or trail off in speech, right? When we're talking, we usually take pauses sometimes as well. So ellipses can be used to show those, right? They can show hesitation, an unfinished thought, or a trailing off in speech. They can imply uncertainty, suspense, or a change in direction, right? For example, I'm not sure if I should. Oh, never mind, right? So the ellipses are where you're thinking, where you're just, not speaking, you're thinking. I thought I saw something in the dark, but you take a pause, it was nothing, right? Then they can also be used to create dramatic effect. The second way that you guys could utilize ellipses in your narratives, right? Ellipses can add a sense of drama or anticipation, especially in fiction or creative writing. They can build tension or suggest something left unsaid, right? For example, she opened the door slowly, cautiously, and gasped at what she saw, right? The stranger's eyes gleamed in the darkness, a chilling sight. So this also creates suspense, right? This also creates a sense of anticipation and suspense. So this covers pretty much everything you guys did ask me to cover, right? I will also be sharing this document, so go through it thoroughly, and then if you have any questions, feel free to text me. Khudafis. And make sure you watch the recording till the end.